light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show is my friend Vendella Sawyer, and I have autism. You've worked with people with autism. You also worked as an LPN for a while. The topic we came up with for today was non-linguistic languages. When I was in high school and people asked, do you want to study a foreign language, it would be French, German, or Spanish, and you would start by learning how to read and write and speak this established language. But that's actually a very limited definition of language. Within autism, I think to approach a broader range of people within the autistic spectrum, people have to be ready to consider that language may be a series of colors, or a series of numbers, or colors that are imbued with a meaning that they don't have for anyone else. I was talking with some parents once who were trying to figure out how to relate to their autistic child, and I said, well, get some cards of all different colors and just hold them up and see what reaction your son gives to each card. Whatever one seems to frighten him the most, whether it's green or purple or whatever color it is, make that the color that you get a whole bunch of stickers in that color and put them on all the dangerous chemicals under your kitchen sink. So that every time he sees that color, he won't want anything to do with it. And if it's a color he really, really likes, we'll put that on the places and the things that you want him to relate to. His favorite games, whatever it is you're trying to motivate him to be drawn toward. Because you can use the colors as a very rudimentary language.
I've learned that pictures work very well too.
Okay. A photograph. Or a drawing.
A picture, if you're having a child with trouble, like now, there's one that I know, going to the bathroom.
Okay.
Okay. Performing the simplest thing that you have to do as far as wiping and washing your hands. So there's a picture of where you go, what you do, what you have to do when you go, what you have to do after you go, and then the other picture says that you have to cut off the light.
The other picture?
The picture says, it's a picture of someone cutting off the light fixture.
Turning the light switch.
Turning the light off.
Okay.
So he's following all of the steps.
Okay.
And by repetitive, he's learning. Because with my son, with his short-term memory, it had to be something that was repetitive. He had to keep repeating.
Until you don't have to think about it.
He doesn't think about it anymore. So any job that he's ever had, it was a repetitive job and still is. But he's now gotten to the point that he can even work, on his own as a supervisor for himself.
Okay.
And younger children, I find out nowadays, it's if you can find that one thing that they really like to do, and you can find a way to work around it. In other words, take what let's say they like to draw.
Okay.
Well, you take, and if you're going to try to teach them to write their alphabet, you draw the letter A, so that they have to color it in, and they know that's A, and they also learn the color.
Okay.
Okay, so I've learned that.
Well, those are different learning styles.
Okay, now.
Before you get to learning styles, though, at this point we're just focusing on language itself.
Right.
How we assign meaning to images or sounds or colors or whatever it is that we use to convey an understanding.
Well, I take it that my nephew, he didn't start talking until he was 8.
Okay.
His way of expressing himself was beating himself up or beating someone else up. And nobody knew what to do. So we were all sitting around kind of brainstorming one day, and I said, let's try something. He likes to beat.
Give him a drum.
That worked later, but we all just did exactly what he did. We beat it on the chair
Okay.
or the table, and he stopped.
So you were mirroring his actions back to him.
Right, and he looked at us like, well, what are you doing? That's what I do. And he started again, and we did it again, and he stopped. And for something clicked with him. So if you wanted to knock, we got like, do you want a piece of candy? 1, 2. That's for yes.
So
We
you
taught-
started by creating the equivalent of letters and then evolved toward the equivalent of words.
Right. So if he wanted something, he couldn't beat on himself anymore. If he wanted, you asked him a question. He understood the question.
Okay.
He just could not express it. So we ended up saying, if you want a cookie, then tap 2 times. If you don't want the cookie, tap 1 time. And he would beat his chest to do it before, but we started getting him to do it on a little...
But he understood your question even though he couldn't speak it back to you.
Correct.
So there was more understanding than there was the ability to speak,
Right.
which is something to bear in mind with any language.
Right.
That there is both the ability to recall and there's one ability to speak it out, but there's a different ability to understand what you hear. So there's a lot of people who will understand German, for example, if they hear it, but they can't say anything in German in response, but they understand what it is they're supposed to do.
Well, I had a friend of mine that came from Taiwan.
Okay.
Now, when I was working at a company down in Florida called Ninya, and it's a Taiwanese company, the wives came over from Taiwan
Okay.
to visit their husbands who were the engineers. And we were individually asked to take one of them home as a guest for 2 days. She could
Take one of
read-
the wives home.
one of the wives home.
Okay.
Well, I had Miss Chad. She could read every billboard in English, but she couldn't interpret it. But she could read it.
She could read it and pronounce it, or
She
she could
could-
read it and understand it,
She could read it, but not understand it.
but not understand it.
But not understand it.
So she knew how to make the sounds.
She knew how to make the sounds and read it completely. So after her learning, I know she could read, but she's not understanding. So being 2 women, we just kind of made it around the house, my house that day, as this is this is that, and she started learning. Well, okay, you know that LMAP means lamp, and she couldn't
Okay.
say it before, and I'm showing her what she's reading.
Okay.
So that helped in that area.
These are all linguistic languages, though.
Yes.
To shift gears and again go back to a broader understanding of language, the ways that we attach meaning to things so that we can transfer understandings from one person to another. If we go with non-linguistic languages, it could be things like a fire alarm going off means exit the building. It could mean things like beating on an empty pot means you're hungry.
Or reading a sign that says it's a smoke-free area. And what you're normally supposed to think is the area says smoke-free. But in a child with autism, in their mind, it's saying the facility is smoke-free and you can free for smoke. And what it should say is no smoking on the property.
Okay. So it could be interpreted as granting permission for smoking. But that's a linguistic language, which is not bad, but it's still, I'm wanting to encourage people through our discussion to,
Are you talking like if someone has Alzheimer's or dementia?
no, I'm saying allowing things to have meaning so that we receive understanding even when we don't have words.
Correct.
That when somebody comes to your door with an empty plate, you know they're asking for food.
Or are they returning the plate?
Or are they returning the plate? If it's your plate or if it's a plate you've never seen before, that would be,
Or you thought it was my plate?
or it could be ambiguous. There was an episode of Star Trek where Commander Troy is, or not Commander, Deanna Troy, Counselor Troy, is having a conversation with the captain, and she holds up a cup of coffee and says some totally unfamiliar word, and then asks him, "What did I just say?" He said, and it could have been cup, it could have been coffee, it could have been hot, it could have been delicious, it could have been all these different things, because it's not a specific enough symbol. And so the question becomes, if you have to relate to someone, whether in a foreign country or someone with a mental disability of some kind, if you have to relate without words, how can we begin to choose effective symbols?
I think it depends on the situation. And then it's trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
You have to...
Well, the formation of any language would be.
You have to experiment to find what works, because the same thing doesn't work for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Things are understood in so many different ways.
And when you come to languages, it's like, even if you're talking about someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia, most of the time they remember the things from their past or their childhood. But I've learned as a nurse that there's one thing that we always remember that we did constantly.
Okay.
It's like one time I had a patient. She worked in dry cleaners.
Okay.
All she did was fold clothes. Her son was
All she did was...
She worked at a laundry, and she folded the clothes after
Folded clothes, okay.
Folded the clothes after they were finished.
Okay.
You have to excuse my southern accent comes in sometimes. Okay.
I didn't quite understand it, I'm sorry.
And she repetitively ironed and folded clothes.
Okay.
Now she's been through 20 nurses, and her son's about to pull his hair out. He doesn't know what to do. So he called me in, along with my group of girls, that we work private duty, and I asked him a question. I said, "What did your mother used to do?" She said, "Well, she worked the laundry all her life." I said, "Okay." I said, "So if you give her a napkin or a piece of cloth, what'd she do?" He said, "She sits there and she folds it." I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "Just let me try something first." So the following day, I worked all day with her. I washed the clothes, and I gave her all the clothes to fold after they came out the dryer. She folded them neatly, watched her soap operas, had her breakfast, and when she finished, I went and got the clothes out the dresser drawer, put them in the basket, and she went through that until lunch, and I finally found out what she could communicate with that she remembered. And as she did that, her memory at present started kind of improving and not being in that childhood state of talking about what she did when she was 18 from 18 to when she was 2. And he was like, "Well, what did you do?" I said, "Well, you have to stay home one day and see. We're communicating because we're doing something that she remembers. She always remembered that she worked at a laundry, she ironed, and she folded clothes. I couldn't give her the iron because I couldn't trust her with that. But I could give her clothes to fold." And that was her way.
But the symbol without the meaning is where it is no longer a language.
It's a language, and the way I interpret it as being a language,
Okay.
because the only time she would really talk is if her son was around, and what he talked to her about, she was always talking as if she was talking to her brother. And by clicking what she remembered from the folding,
Okay.
caused her to start remembering her conversations that she was having as an adult, and the more we did it, the more she was coming back to talking at her age, and she's 68 years old.
Okay.
And that was 5 years ago. And
But all I was trying to say was that there was a symbol that she equated to an understanding, but so many of us do that so automatically that we don't realize how essential the marriage of an object and an understanding is.
well, the reason why I brought it up that way is because most of the time you have someone that has Alzheimer's or dementia, we as family members and even as healthcare workers, we either have a tendency to talk to them like they're a child, like they're a little baby, or we don't talk to them at all. Or we go, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and leave it at that. Instead of trying to open up and try to find a way to get them to express themselves again as they did as adults before they had their illness.
Okay.
That was my point.
So I guess a first step in relating to such persons then is first of all the hypothesis that they are capable of language. But I would guess that most people are. Simply by watching them, you'll see what they are drawn to and what they shy away from. And that in itself is a beginning form of language, because it tells you about them and their sensitivity and their values and priorities and so forth.
Yeah, it's like I had a friend. Everyone assumed that she was deaf, which she was deaf.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't speak. Well, we can't have a conversation with her because she can't hear us and she can't talk.
Okay.
But she can write.
Mm-hmm.
That was my comment. They said,
Okay.
excuse me? I said you can't have a conversation with her when she's with us because we don't speak sign language. But you just
But they never put a pencil in her hand.
No. I'm going like, why are we sitting here and not talking with her? Well, she can't hear us and she can't talk and we don't understand sign language. I said, but she can write.
They had just never given her a paper and pencil to find out.
And she'd gotten so used to it in her life that
To not writing?
For not writing or just sitting there and, she's reading the lips and not associating other than when you go yes or no by shaking her head.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave her a pencil and paper and I wrote on there, says, well, what do you think about this conversation? And she started writing.
Hmm.
But that's been going on for over 15 years.
Hmm.
And both of her parents were professors.
It sounds to me like one of the big problems is that we just don't give people a chance.
It's like we are wrapped up in ourselves so much that we don't have time for one another anymore. My grandmother always used to say, it takes a village or a tribe to raise a child.
I would say it takes a village to do a lot more than just raise a child.
And that's what I was going to get ready to elaborate on. And we're so into our phones and are being self-absorbed in ourselves that we don't think about each other as individuals anymore. I mean, the average, I'll just say my nieces, I guarantee you within an hour period, they're going to take, if they have their phone, they will take 20 self-photos of themselves. And then I have one that will actually go and change clothes.
Okay.
And that's all you see on Facebook. There's more to life than you just taking pictures because now you're a mother of children.
Yeah, I guess this is speaking much more broadly, but I guess to me, I keep coming back to that conclusion that I made several years ago, that if we do not live for something greater than ourselves, our lives become small and petty in their true proportions.
Well, my saying all the time is, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your belief is, you have to believe in something greater than yourself.
If you don't, I'm afraid you're stuck in denial because it's all around us and impinging upon us in so many ways.
Sorry, we have quite a few people that are stuck in denial.
I was going to make a joke and say, well, probably more than the volume of the Aswan Dam, but
I believe that was appropriate.
in any case, I guess where I would encourage autistic people to develop their own independence, it is easy to establish that non-linguistic languages exist. For the nonverbal autistic person who nevertheless understands everything that's going on around them, to begin to look at each object that they can touch and feel and interact with as symbolic of something, or as potentially symbolic of something. Well, it's a very pathetic example, but there was an episode of, I believe it was Saturday Night Live. It's a popular comedy show on television. Mm-hmm. There was one particular strange little sketch they did where Gilda Radner was playing the daughter of this man and wife who were so completely distracted with each other they were neglecting their daughter. And so they go to see this psychologist, supposedly, and the psychologist says to the little girl, aka Gilda Radner, the actress, show me a doll representing you. Or show me a mommy and a daddy doll. And so she picks up the Barbie and Ken dolls. And now show me a doll that represents you. And she picks up a roll of Scotch tape. And suddenly they have this brilliant insight that she sees herself as nothing more than a household object because of how she's being treated and so forth. And of course, because it's Saturday Night Live, the husband and wife are so exhilarated with this new discovery that they become totally absorbed in congratulating and hugging and kissing each other that they are once again neglecting their daughter. But that was an example of a nonverbal language where she was attempting to communicate, hey, I'm being neglected.
But as a person with a child with autism, you still have to teach. It's not so much from my point of view that I've learned over the last couple of years is the education part is important, but until you teach the social skills and communication, you can't go any further. You have to teach what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and then also trying to communicate with them for them to understand what is right and what is wrong.
I don't know. I'm hesitant to ever give an always or never kind of statement.
I'm not saying
I understand the logic, and I'm inclined to agree with you, and yet one of the things about autism is that it keeps throwing exceptions into all our rules.
Yes, because it constantly changes.
It's constantly changing, and each person on the spectrum is different than any other person on the
Correct.
spectrum. So as soon as I say this is how I should deal with this person, along comes this person that I need to do something completely different with.
Well, then maybe I shouldn't change the way I said that. Each person with autism is an entity and a person within themselves. And each situation and each minute and each hour of the day changes. But still, in that hour and in that minute and in that change, you still have to, as the parent or the caregiver or the teacher, you've got to have the patience to try to understand from their side and point of view what they're seeing, but still try to help to teach them the social skills they need to succeed and the behavior that's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and that there are consequences.
I agree with all of that to a point, but I can also see how those words could be twisted, and that's where it becomes very problematic.
What is the problematic part?
A particular person whom I think we both know who has decided to teach her children how to cope by any means whatsoever. Whether you have to lie, cheat, steal, whatever you have to do to be the embodiment of people's expectations so that they will do what you want them to do is okay. And without some kind of moral or ethical grounding, I really worry about what her kids are going to understand as they grow up.
Well, that's where I think when we have to get back to the viewing of someone's got to have the ability to say, listen, this is my point of view about the subject in which you're doing. I may not be right to interfere, but since you're a person that I care about and respect or not respect, but as a human being, that this is what I see. Now, you're either going to listen to my advice, or you're going to think about it, or you're not going to think about it. But that's where you come back with the village again and the tribe together. That
Well,
one
from
person,
a certain perspective, what makes it work is all of us standing together and not trying to go all alone.
in this day and time, I'm still confused as to just exactly what I'm supposed to do.
Hmm.
I know what I can do to the best of my ability, but you can't keep quiet. It's just like being in an environment where everyone's complaining about a certain situation.
Mhm.
And then when they're confronted with the authority to try to change it, okay,
Mm.
then you need to speak up then. But you don't. So after the meeting is over with, oh, you have all this to say. And
But it
then-
never got said.
But it never got said.
Hmm.
And then when you ask, well, why didn't you speak up then? I didn't want anyone to know I felt that way, but you're expressing yourself that way anyway.
In any case, we've scratched on a lot of different possibilities related to this, but I like to think, I guess my summary statement would be that the more we think outside the lines and outside of whatever box we use to describe things, the more possibilities we will ultimately discover.
And I hope we discover them very soon.
You and me both. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching.